Hey friends, it's time for another frigid festival of knowledge. That's right, we're talking about the Cold War. And today, the Bearded Wonder is going to go through the space race with you. So here we go, blast off to learning. Basically, the space race starts at the end of World War II. The Americans and the Soviets both get German technology. In this case, they get access to the V-2 rocket. The Germans had much more advanced technology than either the Soviets or the Americans did at the end of World War II. They just didn't have the industrial output to really make good use of it, but they had experimented with and kind of gotten to the point where they had rockets that were large enough that they could carry objects to outer space. And so off we go on the space race. So, the beginning of the space race is going to be basically the Soviet Union launching Sputnik. Sputnik is the first man-made object to orbit the Earth. It is a satellite. The moon, by the way, technically speaking, is also a satellite, not man-made. And so Sputnik kind of orbits the Earth, and it's a little bit difficult to really understand the panic that this causes in America. Maybe even a little bit more serious than how most of us, at least to this point, have been taking the coronavirus. Really kind of feel like everything's going to end. Sputnik was a really huge deal. They kind of saw this as proof that the Soviets were beating the Americans. It was really time in America for this kind of gut check sort of moment where they realized that they really had to take this whole space race thing seriously because the Soviets were advanced enough to do something like that. However, they don't catch up right away. They do get a satellite into outer space, but again, the Soviets beat the Americans. They're the first ones to send a living animal to outer space. In this case, it's Leica, the dog. Now, Leica doesn't, sadly, for Leica anyway, make it back to Earth alive, which is sort of the goal, but they are the first ones to actually get a living animal into outer space. Leica goes around the Earth a couple of times. She burns up in re-entry, and so they have to try again with some other animals, and again, the Soviets kind of beat the Americans to that as well. They also are the first ones to put a man in outer space. His name's Yuri Gagarin, and he is the first one to orbit the Earth. And so the Soviets, kind of at the beginning stages of this space race, are way out ahead. But as you can see, the space race is a marathon, not a sprint. And the ultimate goal is to get to the moon. And this is, and by the way, the Americans, Alan Shepard, the first American to orbit the Earth after the Soviets, but still before they're able to do anything with the moon. And this is where the Soviets are going to run into a little bit of a problem, a metaphorical wall, if you will. And basically that wall is going to be the fact that they sort of rushed their production in order to make it happen. They kind of took this trial and error approach to technology. And what that means is that even though they managed to orbit the Earth, the amount of technology that's necessary to actually get somebody to the moon alive and then get them back home alive is a lot more complicated than just floating around the Earth a couple of times. And because they've kind of been taking those shortcuts, they did get out in front, but now they don't have the technology to get to the moon. And the Americans, because they've kind of built it more slow and steady, almost that tortoise kind of an approach, are going to be able to make that happen. So the Americans on July, I don't remember the exact date, and I should have looked it up. It's something like July 12th, 1969, are the first ones to land on the moon. And Neil Armstrong, the first one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, are the first and only country to get a man to walk on the moon. And they don't just do it one time, and they don't just do it 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. They actually do it 6 times. The Americans send people on lunar missions. They're all coded Apollo. 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 are the specific mission titles, and they're able to make it to the moon 6 times, which, by the way, is not only pretty, but it's also pretty in the trophy case. Speaking of 6 times pretty in the trophy case, now the Soviets know how Steelers fans, people who aren't Steelers fans, feel, because they have 6 trophies in their trophy case. Just saying, that feeling you're feeling right now might be jealousy. Anyway, in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan decides that he's going to try to speed up the collapse of the Soviet Union. And to do that, he basically announces a new plan that he calls something fancy. We're just going to call it Star Wars. And basically the idea is that he's going to build this super nuclear weapon that's going to orbit around the United States, orbit around the Earth, and it's going to be kind of like a Death Star. And he's not actually planning a Death Star. He's just kind of pretending like he is. They actually set up a whole program for it, kind of tried to make sure that the Soviets found out about it, even though they tried to make it look like it was a secret. And what this does is the Soviets end up spending a ton of money that they don't really have trying to come up with an anti-Death Star weapon. And when they do that, they're essentially flushing money down the toilet. And this is kind of Ronald Reagan, or one of Ronald Reagan's strategies to bring about an end to the Soviet Union faster, and it works. And so that's kind of the conclusion of the space race, and that's it for us today. I hope that you have a good day.